This week on the 302, we head over to Winterthur to check out Revision 2020, a tale of historic women's stories you might not otherwise have heard. Stay tuned, the 302 is up next. Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. We are at Winterthur, and as you know, 2020 is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. So all this year, the museum is dedicating some of its exhibits to women and telling their story. I'm joined now by Kim Collison, who's going to tell us about Revision 2020. Kim, thank you for joining us.
Sure. So Revision 2020 Through a Woman's Lens looks at women's history. We start our exhibition with a portrait of this woman. She's an unknown woman, painted by an unknown artist. She was actually given to the museum by a woman donor many years ago. But we start with this portrait because a woman at this time who had a portrait like this would have been a woman of means. We also know that she's educated, she has a book, she has a lens, which our show takes its name from. And yet here we are in 2020 and we do not know who she is. And this is the story of many women. Their histories have been lost to time, and we no longer know who they are or what their story was. So what we're doing in this exhibition is we're looking at objects both that were already in our galleries here downstairs, as well as objects that we've inserted into the galleries. And we're looking at them from the perspective specifically of a woman's story. So some of the objects might have a label that they had in the past, and then they have a new label next to them that tells that woman's perspective. Other objects we've inserted to tell specific women's stories, and we're looking specifically at creators, thinkers, disruptors, and influencers. So those are our hashtags for the exhibition. And so that includes women authors, women painters, women decorators, women who were historians, women who were involved in the political sphere. We also tackle issues of gender and explore some of those boundaries that may have been broken and, misconceptions we have about gender.
Now this must have been just an immense undertaking, because you said you had some of these items already in-house and others you had to look for. So talk about the process of bringing all these stories together.
Yeah, well, so we knew it was the 100th anniversary of suffrage, and you would think, okay, in a collection of 90,000 objects, it should be easy to find suffrage stories. Actually, Winterthur doesn't have a lot of objects related to suffrage, but we do have a lot of great women's stories. And as we started digging into them, this was supposed to be a simple project, one where, we're looking at things that are already here and inserting a few things. But once you get going, you want to insert more and look at more women's stories. So it actually became quite an endeavor to really look at. I think we have about between 80 and 90 objects that we have interpreted in this exhibition, which is, I think, really great. And we'll be looking at women throughout the year here at Winterthur. We're celebrating women all year, so we have a number of other exhibitions that will be coming up related to women as well. We are going to feature Our Lady of the House, Ruth Wales DuPont, in an exhibition called Lady of the House. We also will be looking at a woman entrepreneur who had a TV show in the 1970s, and she sold many embroidery kits. Her name was Erica Wilson, so that exhibition will open up this fall. And we are also going to be looking at representations of Black womanhood in both objects that they made and in objects representing them. And that's a project our students are working on. So we're really excited to have all kinds of women's stories. And in our house, we're also looking at the women of Winterthur. Both those women who lived here on the estate, not just the women who lived in the house, but also the women who influenced Henry Francis DuPont and inspired his design and the building of the collection.
Well, so often when you talk about the DuPonts, it's usually just the male DuPonts. You don't really hear too much about the ladies. So they have a lot of stories to tell.
They do, and Mrs. DuPont, we often get the question, was there a Mrs. DuPont? Because we don't talk about her a lot. And of course, there was a Mrs. DuPont, and the Lady of the House exhibition will tell her story. It's a small exhibition, but she was a musician, so we look at that aspect of her life. We look at their wedding, which was largely celebrated. It was a big society wedding of the time. And we look at her as a mother, and their lives traveling and entertaining. Actually, she was not a big fan of Winterthur. She preferred their other homes, so we kind of look at that story. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, we've discovered recently that she attended one of the suffrage marches in Washington, D.C., so that was kind of a fun thing to learn about.
Now, when you are going through and preparing an exhibit such as Revision 2020, there's got to be things that surprise you. Is there something that you learned that jumped out at you when putting this exhibit together? I mean, as a professional, you're used to, oh, this is great, this will go great in the exhibit, but was there one thing that you were like, wow?
Interestingly, one of the things that really surprised me while working on this exhibition, I'm sad to say, is how many of those stories we haven't told. Mm. And so I think that's what's really great about this, is that we are celebrating these women. Some of the stories are fascinating. Some of them are more typical, to be honest, but the problem is that we just haven't talked about them. So I think, for me, it was realizing how we really need to do a better job of this.
And you do a fantastic job. And we're going to go and check out some of the exhibit when we come back.
My name is Madison Gregg from Puppy Raisers of the University of Delaware, and puppies love the 302.
Welcome back. We're at Winterthur with Kim Collison, and we're talking about Revision 2020. In this section of the exhibit, it's all about gender. And Kim, tell us a little bit about some of the things we see behind us. I guess we have two stove plates. What are those all about?
Right, so the stove plates are from what's called a jam stove, which had three sides. It would back up to a wall, and actually the fire would be put in behind it from the other side of the wall. The front plate of that jam stove is the celebration of a wedding on a leap year. And so we have the married couple, I think it's 1768, with the clergyman on the front depicted. On the side, we have a depiction of several women underneath a tree, and there are a pair of pants in the tree and a man on the other side of the tree. What we think is happening in that scene is that the women are capturing the pants or treeing the pants. Different folklore call it different things, but the idea is that on a leap year, women and men could reverse roles and a woman could propose marriage. And so we think that what they're showing on this jam stove is that the marriage that's celebrated on the front of the stove is most likely one that was non-traditional and that the woman may have proposed marriage.
So that must have been an interesting find. I mean, did you have this in your collection or did it come to you?
This has been in our collection. It's not the only one. There are actually others in other collections. And stoves like this sometimes depicted folktale kind of stories, but this one is really spectacular. And you see this idea of the leap year, the marriage proposal reversal in postcards and other things as well.
It's really ornate and really cool. And as you go through and you're looking at, the other items that relate to gender, Champagne Charlie is really iconic.
Yes, I love this graphic that we have on the wall, and then we have a book in the case, and what it's showing is Ella Wessner, and Ella Wessner was a performer in the variety theater in the 19th century, and she basically was a cross-dresser. She was taking on men's roles in these theaters, and she was very popular, very successful. The book that we have on view from the library shows her in several different roles, and then we've blown up the Champagne Charlie role, which was very popular.
Now, she started out as a ballet dancer, so she started out, with, I guess, some of the gender norms of the time, but then, I don't want to say she was not an innovator, but she was a rebel, so to speak, and it worked for her.
Yes, so we identify her as a disruptor in the exhibition, certainly because she's pushing those gender boundaries, but she wasn't the only one. There were other women, particularly in the acting world at the time, who were doing the same.
Now, the fancy coverlet, that is a technical term, the fancy coverlet behind us. Tell me a little bit about how that plays into the exhibit.
Right, so this space is typically our textiles gallery as well as our paintings and prints gallery. So what we are looking at here in this coverlet is that sometimes the associations we make with gender and who makes which types of things are wrong. It turns out that men were mostly weavers of coverlets. And this particular coverlet was made by a man for his sister. It was made early in his career. We believe it may have been made even as a sample or to show his skill. And so we look at some of the ways that gender is misconceived in this section of the exhibition.
Now, finally, there is a print that's really, it's just gorgeous, so clean. Tell me a little bit about that.
So the print over here is by Fanny Palmer, who was famously known for being part of the Currier and Ives firm. And her work for Currier and Ives was broad. She did work with steamships and railroad, depicting the railroad, as well as some of the more typical idyllic family countryside settings that you see and are aware of in Currier and Ives. But this is a work that she did. It's depicting the Battle of Buena Vista from the Mexican-American War, and it was used in the paper at the time in an article talking about this particular battle. And it's just this idea that here's a woman who not only was very successful in a career that was very male-dominated, we believe she actually educated some of the men in the field, showing them how to do the trade, but also depicting things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a woman.
Sure. At the time, was this something that was new? I mean, was she a trendsetter? I mean, most women at the time probably, as you mentioned, did things that didn't deal with violence.
Right. She was certainly a trendsetter in her career. I think this particular depiction isn't typical of all of her work, but she was a trendsetter in what she was doing in lithography.
I'm sure there were probably a couple of gentlemen who didn't realize that it had been done by a woman, who maybe might have been shocked to know that a woman had drawn this picture.
Right, and so that's kind of what we're looking at here, is those things that may be surprising to our visitors, that women were engaged in them.
Well, we have a lot of surprises to come. We'll be right back.
Hey, I'm Patrick Bradley at Tonic Bar and Grill, and I'd like to wish the 302 a very happy birthday.
Welcome back. We're talking about Revision 2020 at Winterthur. I'm joined by Kim Collison. Now, Kim, the section that we're in now deals with entrepreneurship, right?
Yes, so here we're looking at women as entrepreneurs. And typically, in the 18th and 19th century, we often think of women in roles mostly as decoration in firms that they were working in. And so we have some of that here in the center case. This features a number of objects in which women were doing that decorating role. We have the textile in the background of this case, which is absolutely stunning.
It's beautiful.
So men were doing the printing of textiles, but blue dyes did not hold in the same way as the other colors. So the blue required that it be hand-painted. And so women were brought in to do that task in the printing of textiles. The other things that we have in this case are glasswork. This particular glasswork came out of the shop of William Bealby. but his sister worked alongside him in decorating the glass. So Mary Bealby may have decorated some of the items that we see here. And then we also have some tinware, which was something that both schoolgirls would sometimes learn how to paint. So the little red one is an example of that. In fact, the girl wrote her name on it and she ran out of room as if a young person running out of paper. And then the white one is an example of a woman whose family was involved in the tinware business. So her husband was making the tinware and she and her nieces were decorating it. And that decoration made it competitive in the market and more valuable. While we see women often involved in those types of roles in entrepreneurship, we also feature here women from the Shaker community. And they are really spectacular because the Shaker community believed in gender equality, and they were also a celibate community. So the women had different advantages of not being at home caring for children. So they were involved in the businesses of the community. In another case in the gallery, we actually have some other objects that women made. For instance, there was a chair maker in one of the Shaker communities, and so we have an example of that. But in this case, we're featuring the Shaker women who were involved in the herbal medicine business. So the Shakers made a lot of herbal medicines, and the women were involved in preparing the herbs and the medicines themselves. And we have a number of items featured in this case. We have some of the bottles from the medicines themselves. We have an image of several of the labels that were featured from medicine bottles that are, these particular ones were unused and are in our library collection. We also have a couple books in there. One of the books is charming. It was a woman from the Mount Lebanon Shaker community. Her name is Prudence Morell. And we have a couple of her books in the library. One of them, this one in the case, is specifically dedicated to remedies for female disorders or problems. And the other book that we have here in the case was one published by a Shaker woman named Mary Winterthur, and she, in her book, is giving recipes and different things for women to use, but she's also promoting one of the Shaker medicines called sarsaparilla, which was sort of this catch-all medicine. It was used for lots of different things, indigestion, women's problems that, was attributed for lots of different things. But what she does is she gets people to promote and stand behind the sarsaparilla, and she advertises that in this book alongside her recipes. And then the other great find that's in that case is this, what we would call a bandbox, which is sort of this box that is a catch-all. And it's unique because the box is decorated with these large broadsides that were advertising sarsaparilla and another one of the Shaker medicines. And they may be some of the few surviving broadsides like that. Those broadsides would have appeared on the side of a building or on a fence post, but someone took the time to use them to decorate this particular box, which is sort of a unique survival, and really attesting to that Shaker medicine. Those women in the Shaker community, like I said, were very involved in making the medicines, and were even sometimes called into other medical manufacturers outside the Shaker community to participate in creating the drugs of the time. We also have a case here featuring Native American women. So Native American women in the 19th century, one of the things that they did to help make money to support their families was creating artistry that they would sell to the tourist industry. And so this is a case featuring a selection of different baskets that we know were made by Native American women. It's a variety of baskets. One of them is a large wall pocket, which is a sort of, you can imagine a catch-all for your keys or things that you'd come in and put things in when you entered the house. And so they may have had a variety of different items in something like this. And these baskets are charming. They're decorated, hand painted in some cases, and a variety of different shapes and sizes. One of them is an example of quill work made with porcupine quills.
Really?
And would have been quite colorful. It's got some blues and a variety of colors in it.
There's just so much to see, and when visitors come to Winterthur and they are looking at the exhibit, there's an app that will go with it. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the app essentially, because this exhibition is inserted in our permanent galleries, the app will help people guide themselves to the different objects that are interpreted from the women's perspective. It will feature images and information about the objects, and also some supplemental materials, like some of the interviews that we've done, and some audio and things talking about the objects with our curators.
And how do people get the app? Is it on the Apple Store or?
Yes, it is available in the Apple Store. It's the Winterthur app. Or you can just use your browser and go to winterthur.onsale.com.
Well, it's definitely a fantastic exhibit. Kim, thank you so much for showing it to us.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. For more information on Revision 2020 or any of the exhibits here at Winterthur, you can visit winterthur.org. That'll do it for this episode of The 302. We leave you now with a beautiful sunset from the wharf at Newcastle. Until next time, we'll see you on The 302.